Our second scripture reading this morning comes to us from Luke's Gospel, chapter 7, verses 18 through 23, and it can be found on page 65 in the New Testament section of the Bible if you'd like to follow along. Hear the word of the Lord. John's disciples told him about all these things. Calling two of them, he sent them to the Lord to ask, "Are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else?" When the men came to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist sent us to you to ask, 'Are you the one to come, or should we expect someone else?'" At that very time, Jesus cured many who had diseases, sicknesses, and evil spirits, and gave sight to many who were blind. So he replied to the messengers, "Go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk. Those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor. Blessed is the man who does not fall away on account of me." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about John baptizing Jesus and how John testified that Jesus was the one. There was no question of John's certainty that Jesus was, in fact, the Messiah. So it seems a little odd that John sent a couple of people to inquire of Jesus if he was the one or if they should expect someone else. But John wasn't asking because he didn't know. John was seeking confirmation and public proclamation. Jesus had been secretive about being the Messiah and had insisted that all the disciples hold their tongues about it until the time was right. And if you think about it a little like a wedding or a couple having a baby, you understand they want to get everything in place before they actually tell people what's going on. But the people who are most intimately involved want them to go ahead and get on with it. Well, John wanted them to go ahead and get on with it. But Jesus said, not yet. The people were living in difficult circumstances under the oppression of Roman rule, and they'd been expecting the Messiah to come as their deliverer. They expected the Messiah to come and save them not so much in eternal terms, but practical ones. They were suffering in the here and now, and they sought liberation immediately. In fact, the coming of the promised Messiah had become very pointedly focused on liberation more than any other aspect of the prophecies. Unfortunately, for those who were waiting, liberation was their plan, not God's plan. So they were anticipating the wrong thing. The faithful Jewish people were living in a time like a dry desert in the beginning of our passage from Isaiah this morning. John knew that. John was part of that. And he wanted Jesus to hurry up already and deliver them. His inquiry was not meant as a sign of waning faith, but a kind of nudge to get things moving. And it makes sense that John, especially at this time, would want things to move right along. Not only were the people under the rule of the Romans, but John was stuck in prison for having questioned Herod Antipas' relationship with his brother's wife. John was under the threat of death. So it's not really a big leap of intelligence to figure out that John had a vested interest in getting the liberation from oppression thing rolling right along. Once things got rolling, well, there would be beauty and glory all around, according to Isaiah's words. The desert and parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The joy of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of God. Sounds pretty good even to our modern ears, doesn't it? Much more so to those living under oppression. It's easy to understand why the people would want Jesus to hurry in the task that they had decided was what he had come to do. But Jesus didn't come to do the bidding of the oppressed Jews any more than he came to do our bidding in modern times. Jesus came to fulfill the prophecies and to liberate God's children, but not in this world necessarily. It was frustrating for the Jewish people who had waited so long and placed such expectation on the promised Messiah. And the frustration shows in John's inquiry to Jesus. Are you the one, or should we expect another? Jesus, ever patient with those whose faith and questions were sincere, responded, but, as was so often the case with Jesus, not exactly in the expected manner. He didn't say, yes, I am he. Instead, Jesus said, go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight. The lame walk. Those who have leprosy are cured. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. And the good news is preached to the poor. Blessed is the man who does not fall away on account of me. By telling the men sent from John to report not only what they heard, but also what they had seen, Jesus was actually strengthening the witness to John as he was stuck in prison. It's interesting to note that Jesus didn't mention anything at all about what John had already witnessed himself. It would have been easy, I would think, for Jesus to say, tell John to remember what he saw and what he said and what he heard with that voice from above. But that would be a little bit of a reproach to John, kind of like when you're reminded by someone you love that you failed to keep a promise or remember a special event or take out the trash. Instead, Jesus gives additional support to what was already known. Jesus points out that in the sight of these men sent from John, he has fulfilled more prophecies about the Messiah. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are healed, the deaf hear, the dead live again. All this in the midst of preaching the good news to the poor. These words, fulfilling and even expanding on Isaiah's prophecy, demonstrate clearly that Jesus is the one, and they offer hope to John and all those who are suffering still. While Jesus doesn't mention the rest of the particular prophecy we read this morning, it would most certainly be implied. Just as in modern times we imply the rest of a well-known phrase, so too did the ancients. We might say something like, wherever two or three are gathered, or a bird in the hand, and we don't feel any need to complete the saying because we know the hearer will fill in the rest. That was a common practice in regard to the scriptures in the time of Jesus. A teacher or rabbi would say only a portion of the scripture, and those who knew the scriptures would fill in the rest in their heads, knowing it was expected. So when Jesus claimed to fulfill this prophecy, he claimed to fulfill the rest of it also. Water will gush forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand will become a pool, the thirsty ground bubbling springs. In the haunts where jackals once lay, grass and reeds and papyrus will grow. These are words of great hope for a future filled with good things, miraculous things. Jesus has not only answered John, he has offered concrete actions, additional support for belief in him as Messiah, and hope for the future. This fulfills the middle part of the prophecy, which says, strengthen feeble hands, steady knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear, your God will come. He will come with vengeance, with divine retribution. He will come to save you. Jesus is God, and he was strengthening the weak in both body and spirit. He was also getting them ready to deal with divine retribution for sin, which is not necessarily the same thing as what humans might believe. Divine retribution focuses on addressing what God sees as wrong in the manner God sees fit. It's not about our revenge on those who have harmed us. It is about God correcting wrongs of human existence. That's what we as Christians should strive to do when people question us about our faith, or when we stumble on an opportunity to witness to our faith. We shouldn't attack the questioner or the non-believer. We shouldn't try to logically argue someone into faith as if some kind of scientific proof will make a difference. We shouldn't try to impose our own retribution or threaten with what we think God's retribution might be. Instead, we should focus on testifying to personal experiences, the reality of prophecies fulfilled, and the great hope for the future that exists even in the midst of the most difficult of circumstances. Years ago, more than I care to count anymore, I led a Bible study with a group of women who had selected the curriculum, Becoming a Contagious Christian. Any of you heard of that one? It's a little old now. There was this workbook that the ladies had purchased, and homework and lessons and practice sessions, and the whole curriculum was focused on learning how to share our faith in an inviting way that engendered excitement and enthusiasm and was contagious. And it took me way out of my comfort zone. It is not always comfortable to practice sharing our faith, even with those we know well. For all that we host some events here at IPC, how many of them do we really talk about our faith? For all that we who are sitting here claim the name of Christ and purport to accept the priesthood of all believers and do good work with charitable groups we partner with, how many of us believe we truly have a right, much less an obligation, to share our faith with others? When was the last time in a politically correct and easily offended culture that we talked about our faith even just conversationally? When was the last time that you spoke to others about what you believe and why, and what events have happened in your life that have supported your belief? I'm sure some of you are very good at it. Some do it with far greater comfort than I feel testifying myself, but I would guess that there are some who have never been so bold as to have discussed your faith with even your closest friends. In the days of the early church, there wasn't a typical worship service. There weren't bookstores or study Bibles or devotional books to give to friends to try to draw them in. There were no handbooks to help people find answers to their questions in the Bible. There weren't sermons by trained clergy. There wasn't even a Bible as we know it, since most of the New Testament hadn't yet been written. And it certainly hadn't all been printed and copied and bound for a literate public to read. There were just believers. Believers who were so excited about their faith, so amazed at God working in their lives, that they told everyone what they had seen and heard so that others too might have that great hope that they had found. That is how and why the gospel spread. If the main way that the early believers attempted to get others to believe was inviting them to a typical roughly an hour sit in a pew, sing a few hymns, modern church service without some personal sharing beforehand, I suspect Christianity would be nothing but a footnote in the history of world religions. Church is for those who already believe and want to learn more, and want to be fed, and want to belong to and be supported by and support a particular family of faith. If you truly care for someone and you suspect they might not be a believer, the greatest gift you can give that person is the peace that stems from a life of faith. And the way to give that gift is by talking to them, sharing your own faith journey. And it doesn't have to be one of these stunning conversion moments complete with blinding scales falling from your eyes. It doesn't have to be a personal witness of a miraculous healing. Don't you have such a story? Absolutely share it. All it takes is the time and the courage to tell someone why you believe what you believe in an open and honest way, and a willingness to answer the questions you can, humbly admitting when you don't know the answers. Knowledge is a great thing, but it does little to provide the hope that the world so desperately needs. That's what faith is for, providing hope. So share your faith every chance you get, gently, respectfully, but share your faith. Share it with other believers. Share it with non-believers and questioners and strangers. Practice at home. Write out your stories, and if that helps, and read them aloud to yourself or your family or your friends until you become comfortable telling them aloud. Do whatever it takes to be ready when the opportunity arises to help make a new believer or strengthen a questioning one. When God gives you an opportunity to testify, think of it as a divine way of asking, are you the one to help me save this soul, or should I wait for another? And be ready to answer.